Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again, and this time we're going to talk about using emitters to create a sequence that can help bring your dream scene to life. We will be working in my dream scene, The Lost Valley of the Ancients, which is available and remixable in Dreams if you want to follow along. The logic to control this sequence is in the village portion of the scene inside a microchip named Town Gauntlet. The layout of this sequence is a little different than other stuff I've done lately. I'm using a trigger zone that covers the entire area that the sequence takes place in. This serves to turn the trigger zone into a binary state machine rather than simply as a means of starting a larger sequence. That means we have two states, in the trigger zone and not in the trigger zone. In this regard, our sequence is what happens in the trigger zone and the rest of the game happens outside of it. So what happens in the trigger zone? We have an earthquake. So we want a camera shaker to make it look like things are shaking, and we have a sound to make it sound like rumbling, crumbling, and stumbling. We haven't looked at camera shakers before, but they are quite simple. You have some slides to control the shake. The most important part is that the active camera will shake whenever one has power, so be careful to control when these are active. I have the trigger zone detected output running to a signal manipulator. That signal manipulator is set to custom remapper toggle at on, and then I have the output of the signal manipulator hooked up to its freeze input. This will cause the signal manipulator to output when the target first enters the zone and then continue to output. The signal manipulator runs to the power of a timeline set to run once. The timeline will act as the intro sequence to the scenario. We have several cameras in this timeline and all of them are set to disable controls. In this way, we will remove player control while the sequence is playing and then return control to the player when it finishes. I have a rumbler in the timeline. You want to be careful with controller rumblers because they are easily overplayed. We can sneak some in here because the player is not doing anything with the controller. Our use is limited to about 15 seconds, and we are simulating an earthquake after all, so it's appropriate. Other than that, we have a couple of text displayers to accompany a couple of lines of dialogue by our main character. So overall, it's a simple sequence, and really this is all you need a lot of the time. So I would encourage people to add things like this to their content. So back to the trigger zone, we are also running a wire out to a node that sends the signal to a bunch of different places. I created this logic a while back, so I'll just move that node into the Town Gauntlet microchip to clean things up. So where is the signal from the node going? To a bunch of emitters stationed above the various rooftops over this alleyway, and that is our gauntlet. So what dangerous missiles are we emitting and hurling toward our player? Boulders? Poisoned arrows? No, roof tiles! Work with me, people! So here's the inside of an emitter. You have lots of options, but the main gist is that the gadget will create something out of thin air at the position of that white dot on top of the gadget. Emitters are fun gadgets, but this isn't an emitter tutorial, so I won't go too in-depth, but let's talk about how we're using them here. Some of these, when we create them above the roof, will slide right off and fall to the ground like we want them to. However, some of these will get stuck if we don't give them a push first, so on most of these we have the emit speed set to more than 0. This fires the element at that speed in the direction of the white arrow on the left. Some other things we will concern ourselves with are emitted object lifetime and max emitted at once. We want to give these a max lifetime just in case anything happens and things don't go according to plan. That way we can make sure they're destroyed and making room for a new one. We can accomplish that by setting max emitted at once to 1. That way we make one, it destroys, and a new one is created. This keeps stray tiles from piling up and also lets you control the pacing of the sequence. So we can have some areas where there are more tiles created per minute than others. Back into the first emitter we looked at for a moment, if you notice there is a red dotted line running from the gadget off into the distance. That line is pointing to the original copy of the thing to be emitted. Under normal circumstances that thing will be invisible, so if you want to find it or alter it, you need to toggle preview invisibility under the show hide option in the main edit menu. So this is our deadly tile, and it has some logic. You give emitted objects logic the same way you would normally by surface snapping the logic to them. This tile is a group of one sculpt and one painting, and we have labeled that group as a missile under the group's Labels and Ownership tab. If we check Rdio at the scene start point, we will find an impact sensor in that logic, and we will find that the impact sensor is set up to react to missiles. And we will notice that the output of that impact sensor is wired to Rdio's controller sensor's respawn input. All of these factors combined will cause Rdio to respawn at the checkpoint at the start of the sequence anytime Rdio is hit by a roof tile. Yay! So let's examine the logic on this roof tile and see what it does. First of all, we have an impact sensor, so we are trying to find out when the tile hits something. We know it isn't Rdio because that's already taken care of. In the Properties and I/O tab, we see that it is marked with the Scenery label, and it turns out that the ground beneath the tiles is set to Scenery in its Labels tab. The output of touch on that sensor will run to a signal manipulator that will make that output persistent the first time it happens, like we talked about earlier to start the timeline. We'll use that signal to power a few different things. One is an emitter, the other a sound, and the last is a destroyer. Like I said earlier, this wiring is fairly old, and I want to do the destroyer a little differently. I want to make sure the sound has a chance to play before the tile is destroyed, so I'm going to power the destroyer with the is playing output from the sound. So we are emitting an object from an emitted object. If you didn't know that you could do that, now you know. But what are we emitting? It is a tile broken up into a bunch of pieces. This is an old John Beach trick where the pieces collide with each other and go flying away from the center of the object. In this way, we give the impression that the roof tile has collided with the ground and shattered. While we're on the subject, I want to show you a cool part about Dreams as far as prototyping and balancing is concerned. So let's say you're messing with this shattered pieces emitter and trying to get it right. You can open up the menu for the emitter, adjust, and then restart from the same place in play mode to instantly see the results. So in this case, we'll see what happens if the tile pieces aren't destroyed all that quickly. And they start to pile up. In this way, you can adjust gameplay on the fly. In the original version, you just run through the alley trying not to get hit. But the pieces are missiles too, so they also cause Rdio to go back to the last checkpoint. With these piles, now you have stuff you need to jump over as well. There are lots of ways you can adjust that to give you gameplay variations. On this one, I cranked the emit speed up, and it's basically bullet hell. The very last thing in this setup is another checkpoint at the end of the alley. The way it's set up, the sequence does not end, so anytime you're in the alley trigger zone, the earthquake starts and tiles fall. But if one hits you after you finish the sequence, you at least respawn on the far side of the alley so you don't have to do it over again. So in this video, we learned how to create an emitter gauntlet sequence. Don't think of it simply in terms of roof tiles. Remember, you could fire just about anything you wanted at the player. Plenty more videos coming up. While making this one, I remembered that I wanted to do a tutorial on how to make your own toony voiceover clips like I do for Rdio in this scene, so expect that soon. But that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you in the Dreamiverse.